Embassy of Israel to the United States has put out a post on X with a photo showing what they claim was the launch site of this attack on the Gaza hospital. They say that the Al-Ali hospital in Gaza was hit this evening by a failed rocket launch of Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They are saying that this organization, which is a Hamas ally, is behind this attack, and they show a rocket launch site that is within Gaza, and they say that's responsible for this attack on the hospital in Gaza. Now, to help us understand how this could derail peace efforts in the escalating Israel-Gaza war and multiple facets of the war, we are joined by experts on the discussion on the broadcast now. Mr. Raymond Vickery, the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, is joining us, along with Mr. Prabhu Dayal, the former ambassador, both joining us on the broadcast. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for joining us on NDTV this morning. My first question to you, Mr. Raymond. This attack on the Gaza hospital comes just hours ahead of the US President Joe Biden's visit to Israel. So do you think that this attack could derail possible peace efforts and diplomatic efforts that the US President Joe Biden was hoping for?
Well, thank you very much for having me this morning. It is indeed a very serious and sad day. I think President Biden has made it clear that he feels very personally the hurt which has been inflicted by this and the original attack from Hamas. I think you have to understand that President Joe Biden is a child of World War II, in which 60 million people were killed worldwide. And it is his effort and his absolute commitment to trying to keep this conflict from escalating that has caused him to be able to go. Now, this bombing of the hospital, of course, however it occurred, has accomplished exactly what Hamas and Islamic Jihad would want, and that is further chaos, further anger, which makes it even more difficult. In spite of this, President Biden is going ahead with this trip. I think he wants to keep it from escalating by, one, showing support for Israel, but two, also seeing whatever can be done with Egypt and with Jordan in terms of being able to help prevent further civilian casualties. And I think that India has a role to play here. India has contacts with Israel, with Iran, and is very firmly against terrorism. So it seems to me that these two great democracies, the U.S. and India, can be working together on this.
That's very interesting. And you also point out that U.S. and India should also be working together on this. Many experts have pointed out how India has a leverage in this entire situation. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, I want to come to you next. That you've been an ambassador of India to Kuwait and Morocco. You understand the region. I want to ask you this, that with respect to this particular attack on the hospital in Gaza, and amid the warnings that have been issued by Iran also, saying that Israel could face counterattacks from several groups, do you think that this could lead to an unprecedented escalation of this war, and this could possibly lead to a spread of this war to more and more regions?
Well, thank you for having me on your show. Indeed, that is what most countries are fearing. And in fact, President Biden's visit was also taking this into account. He had, in fact, three objectives. Firstly, he wanted to show support for Israel, which he had already done by sending 2 warships to the Mediterranean. He also wanted to prevent the conflict from escalating. And there are signs that this might be happening, because the Iranians have taken up a very aggressive posture, and there is anger in many of the Arab countries after the bombing of the hospital in Gaza, although the Israelis have pointed out that this was a Hamas missile which went astray, and that it was not they who had bombed the hospital. But nonetheless, the bulk of public opinion in the Arab countries feels that the Israelis were to blame. So there is anger among the Arab countries.
Right.
And of course, one of the objectives which India always has been emphasizing, and the other countries also, is to send in relief supplies into Gaza, because millions of Palestinians are displaced from their homes. They're facing a very difficult situation. They don't have any supplies of food or water, medicines. So relief supplies were considered very important at this juncture. Now all this becomes very complicated. President Biden was hoping to have a summit with the King of Jordan, with the Egyptian president and the president of the PLO, but that summit is not taking place. So whatever hopes were built around the possibility of these efforts by President Biden, along with some of the prominent Arab leaders, to prevent the conflict from escalating, these are stymied. So I'm really worried about the course of events which is going to unfold now.
Right, that's a big worry, for several Middle Eastern countries, that this war could spread. And I want to make that point clear, that you also mentioned that while the public sentiment was earlier that Israel is behind this attack, as the Hamas-led Gaza Health Ministry blamed Israel, but Israel has blamed the Palestinian armed group Islamic Jihad. So there's a counter-blame, while Islamic Jihad, that armed group, has denied responsibility in this attack. So, Mr. Raymond Vickery, there's no responsibility that's being claimed for this attack as of yet. We don't know who's behind it. There's no official statement by any group claiming responsibility. But as Ambassador Prabhu Dayal also mentioned, that this comes ahead of US President Joe Biden's visit. And do you think this could pose challenges for the US President's visit? Ambassador Dayal pointed out certain objectives that the US President had for his visit to Israel. Do you think this could be a hurdle in achieving those objectives?
There's no question that it's a hurdle in achieving the objectives. And I would point out that even though we don't know exactly who's to blame here, this is exactly the kind of result that a terrorist organization like Hamas would want to have happen. It has accomplished an objective already of derailing this meeting with the leaders of Egypt, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority, which is absolutely necessary. Now, President Biden, after he meets with the Israelis, both Netanyahu and the work cabinet, is going to talk by telephone on the way home with these leaders of Egypt, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority. That's not a substitute for face-to-face kind of meeting, and unfortunately, this has derailed it, and it has to work to the advantage of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and one would hope that India and the U.S. will see this for what it is, as part of a terrorist approach to international affairs. You send people into a country, you kill men, women and children indiscriminately, and then the chaos comes and you blame those who are the victims for the chaos, which is a typical tactic.
Right, and considering that the Arab leaders in Jordan, in Palestine, both have cancelled their meetings with the US President Joe Biden, so it is going to be a big challenge for the president's visit to Israel while he was hoping to talk to the various parties involved to hope to come to a conclusion. But I want to ask you this as well, Mr. Raymond, that there are several speculations, and I don't want to delve into speculations, but would you think that this attack on the Gaza hospital was strategically planned by whichever side did it to derail the US president's visit? Because it can't be just coincidental, can it, that it comes just hours ahead of the US president's visit?
Well, I think that there's a very strong case, a circumstantial case, that is exactly what has happened. And I don't see that Israel would have any interest in doing that and derailing it. It seems to me that this plays right into those who would want to see an escalation of tension, a widening of the war, and of course that's exactly the purpose of Hamas in attacking Israel in the first place.
Right.
But that having been said, there has to be a way to be able to relieve the pressure on the civilians in Gaza, and that is exactly what President Biden is trying to do, and continue it, and ought to get some credit for continuing on even in the face of this attack.
So there could be a possibility that this attack was timed ahead of the U.S. president's visit. I want to ask you one more question before I go back to Ambassador Derail again, that while the United States is reiterating its support for Israel, the U.S. President Joe Biden's visit to Israel is also aimed at reiterating his support. The United States is giving military support to Israel as well. But now there's a growing call in several countries. There are protests in several countries calling for help for Gaza. As we are seeing, there's a humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza. Humanitarian aid has been blocked by more ways than one. So there are growing calls for the United States to support the civilians in Gaza while it's supporting the military action in Israel.
Yes, I don't think there's any question that there is that call, and there is that growing sentiment, of course, in the United States as well. The question is, how do you do it without falling into the hands of what Hamas has tried to create in the first place, which is to be able to widen the war. The keys here, of course, are those people that President Biden would have met with face to face, the leader of Egypt and of Jordan. As well as the Israelis. But there's no question in my mind that President Biden is going to ask the tough questions, as has been said, about how you're going to be able to conduct this consistent with the rules of war.
Right, and Ambassador Derail, I want to come to you on that point made by Mr. Raymond, that the White House is saying that President Biden is going to ask Netanyahu tough questions. But beyond supporting civilians, as President Biden has done till now, what protesters across several countries are saying is that the United States is supporting Israel with military support, and Israel is using that kind of military support to attack civilians in Gaza. That's what protests are about. So do you think that there needs to be a balancing act to show that world leaders are with the civilians of Gaza as well? Because, of course, we agree that Hamas started the attack, and Israel launched these attacks as counterattacks to Hamas's attacks. But now it's the civilians who are suffering.
Well, let me preface whatever I'm going to say by mentioning that I condemn terrorism in all its forms.
Of course, as all of us should.
The terrorist attack which was launched by Hamas against Israel is totally condemnable, and I will not say anything which condones that, because terrorism is highly condemnable.
Absolutely.
And the world was trying to somehow prevent this conflict from escalating. The world was also trying to prevent the sufferings of the Palestinian people from escalating or from increasing. Now there are serious challenges which have come up. President Biden's visit to Israel and to Jordan was also focused on achieving these objectives. He was also trying to prevent the conflict from escalating. He was also trying to do something that would make relief supplies go into the Gaza Strip. As it is, for an American president, turning up in a war zone is an extraordinary move. And this trip was always considered to be a high-stakes gamble.
Right.
But now with the situation becoming more volatile, he's flying into an even trickier situation, because with the bombing of the hospital in Gaza that killed more than 500 people, Arab opinion seems to be drifting further away from the American position.
Right.
Saudi Arabia, for instance, has condemned the hospital bombing.
Right.
There have been protests across the Arab world. Now, regardless of who is found responsible for the explosion, and the fact remains that the bombing of the hospital will complicate efforts to contain the crisis.
Right,
This
and
is my biggest worry.
right, and regardless of which side did it, it is condemnable to the highest order, given that patients have been killed. Over 500 people have been killed at that hospital. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us on the broadcast, for joining us on NDTV this morning. And I think the point made is loud and clear that this hospital attack in Gaza, in which over 500 people have been killed, that is definitely going to derail any possible peace efforts in the Israel-Gaza war amid and ahead of the US President Joe Biden's visit to Israel. We'll keep you updated on the latest. For now, time for a short break.